Hey everyone, wanted to go over the new Nornir Pyxl plugin that I've been working on the last couple days. It's just a simple Open Pyxl plugin for Nornir. Basically, one thing that I've come to realize, unfortunately, us network engineers don't always get our data from our team or coworkers or other team members in other projects, in pretty JSON format or whatever. So I found myself importing data into my playbooks or runbooks in this case, creating custom functions and classes to wrap either pandas or PyXL and bring some data and work with it. So I kind of got tired of that and I started experimenting with this. So this is available now to download it via pip. So it's just a simple pip install and you should get it. I just put a quick example here on how to use it. I'm not too sure if this should stay this way. I think it's still early on. I could change it to make something that makes a little bit more sense for those who have not used the PyXL pip library. I'm sorry, Python library. This WB is pretty standard for workbook, and I figured structured data would be a good kind of clarification of what you're getting back in this in the function. So let's just take a quick look at it and see what it's actually doing. Basically, it's just wrapping PyXL into Nornir. So you give it a couple different parameters, such as the workbook file. So you just tell it where the Excel file is, as well as the name of the sheet name, and that's pretty important. One thing I do hate about this PyXL is it's very specific, and not that I hate it, it's just that sometimes it bites you. If the worksheet has spaces or whatever else, such as upper lower cases, you gotta put in exactly what's the worksheet name. So just keep an eye out for that. However, once you do that, there's really not much more. It is only read only always, so I kind of hard code that in here, and it makes it easier to open and it's quicker. There's a couple other things if you want to read through this that you can manipulate your data with, or not manipulate, but what you get back exactly. So basically you just load the workbook with the file name, and here's a couple parameters that you pass in, and the read only will always be set to true. And then you go dig into the workbook and open up the worksheet by sheet name. And then basically I'm just gonna append the first row as your keys, and then the rest will be your pairs, and then you get a nice pretty dictionary for everything in the Excel file, and then you close it. So let's just take a look at a simple example that I put, and I'll upload a link to this GitHub repo that I've created to show in this video. I just found this on the internet. It's a simple data Excel sheet. There's some sales orders here, and you can see the sheet name is sales orders. So let's just, before we get too deep, I'll show you what the structure of the runbook will be using. I've got a couple playbooks here, so runbooks I should say, sorry, BGP, Excel deploy, which is I'll show you guys how I envision this being used, etc., etc. Just some directory for logs, the inventory, and then I just created an input data, and that's where I'm putting my Excel sheets. And then here's the simple data example runbook, and we'll just go ahead and take a peek at that real quick. So here it is. So here's the actual data that we're going to import. So there's about 150 rows in here. And then we'll take a look at the actual script. It's pretty basic, right? We're just going to import this function from the new plugin after you pip install it. And then I'm just going to pass in the task into a function, and then I'm going to get the pass in where the Excel sheet is, and then the sheet name is again sales order, you gotta mind those capitals in there. So then I just loop through it just like any other dictionary in Python. So then I just print it out. So then at the end here, we'll just call it and run it. So let's just take a look at it and see. So again, there's 150 lines or rows, I should say. Just say Python 3, and there it is. So that's pretty neat. Now, the one thing that could get tricky here is I'm not doing much processing, so I'm kind of letting the input, have to be formatted correctly. And what I mean formatted correctly is, always have your columns, your top row 1 columns as your keys that you want to assign. If there are none or empty spaces, or sometimes there's like if someone clicked on a sheet on a cell and like hit a space, or I'm not sure why, but sometimes I've noticed that you'll get back an empty field and it'll be recognized by Pyxl. So we'll talk about that here in a bit, but this is kind of the formatting that we should follow. You can start from different rows and different columns, but at that point you might as well just write your own code for that, because it could get pretty complex. So let's just show exactly what I'm talking about with some errors and some manipulation we'll have to do in post-processing. The one thing that I did do when bringing in the data is I did just do a quick strip. The last thing I want is to, if there's a space after rep here, for example, then when you're trying to use your actual dictionary data and you call that key, you don't want to worry about a spacing issue. So that's the only thing I could think about that was worth adding into the actual plugin. So let's close out of that. Now I created just an example here, what I thought could really showcase what you could do. So, well, like I said, in this field, sometimes the data that comes your way and you got to do stuff with it. It's not always JSON, or you didn't just download it from, you didn't call it from an API and it came back to you in a format that you can use it. So, that's my whole reason for wanting to bring this into the table here. So, for my example, and somewhat of a real world scenario that could happen, and you wanted to come up with a way to get data from, say, like some sort of sales person or something like that, or maybe a team that collaborated on this, or someone maybe that's not up to speed on, maybe even simple as writing a YAML file or something like that. You could just create a spreadsheet, right, with however you want to input your data into your program. So let's take a look at what I've done here. Customer BGP info. So this is the spreadsheet I created. It's just very simple. You just assign an AES number, the IP address that's going to be assigned to your interface, and sorry, I should specify the whole point here is going to be create BGP neighbors, right, with just a simple data. So you'll give the network, which is going to be, and the host bit's going to be assigned to the neighbor. So 23 out of the /31, and this IP will belong to your neighbor. And then the cool thing with Excel is that you can get pretty fancy. So I just made like a quick example here. So say what group or policy map in Cisco World you want to assign it to. You can create little drop downs, and then that way that your data will always be consistent. You don't have to rely on users typing stuff in. And then I kind of threw in a curveball here just to kind of show how things can really go wrong. So test 1, test 2, but as you can see, there's nothing in column D for row 1 here. So if we follow the logic of the program, it takes everything in this column, and in this row, and then it appends it by each cell to the corresponding key. So we'll deal with that in a post-processing of your program. So I'm just kind of give an example. And then just a quick VLAN. So we'll just close out of this. And we'll kind of show the topology, and then we'll actually run the playbook and runbook. I'm sorry, I keep saying playbook. And then basically what's going to happen, we'll deploy to the 7750 and pretend this is an IXP fabric. So if this were to be like a data center somewhere and we've got a couple different peers that we want to peer with all at once, maybe you collected the sessions over a couple weeks, and it's time to maybe do change management and deploy some new configurations. So now that we've got all our data, we will look at the program. Let's close out of this. And here is the actual runbook of what I created. So gonna bring some stuff in. We're gonna use NetMiko, write file, template file, standard plugins. We're also gonna take advantage of the IPv4 network from the IP address library. One custom function here, so it's a create folder, just so we can kind of organize where data is going. So the first one here is render BGP neighbors. So here's when we call in the workbook structured data. We'll just assign it to a variable named data. Workbook is the input data folder, and the spreadsheet and BGP data is what I called the Excel sheet. Then I'll just make sure that the output folder is created in my directory here. Then we just loop through it, right? So let me not actually deploy it, and we'll print this out so we can see the errors that we get, and then we'll just so as you can see here, it brings in the none and test, and then none test, and then the third one I actually left the cell empty, so it's none. So I didn't think it was going to be too general, and it was going to have to be too much. It was going to break it if I try to process this beforehand. So I left it. So really what should happen is the data should be formatted correctly when coming in, and then if you need to do some processing, post-processing, there's some pretty simple ways to do it. So let's just we'll just kill this line here, 36, and then we'll actually assign a new line to peer. Oops. All right, so we'll just do some list comprehensions, and this one took me a minute to think about, but really it's just key for value pairs, and then look through the items of it. Basically we're just going to filter, right? We're just going to filter through the dictionary. If it's none, then just drop it. And once that's done, then we're just going to get a little fancy here. We're going to call in the IP object out of the IPv4 network. And then we're going to assign that to the IP address. One thing to note here, for those of you who are familiar with the IP address library, strict false should be enabled if you're working with the /31. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. I don't recall what it is, but something to keep in mind. And then we just we list through the host of this network, and sorry, I should have read these notes here. So then we're just going to create a two different keys. So the local IP, so that when we render our template, I can make sure I have my correct side of the peering relationships IP. So we'll just call that host 0, which is the first element in the list, and then we'll append back the IP prefix length, which should match whatever we already stripped out of it by. Well, it's been assigned to the IPv4 network as an IP object, so it's there. So we just pull it out of here and append it to the first element of the list, like I said, and then that's what's going to be our local IP. And then just kind of the same thing for peer, except for when you're creating a peer BGP neighbor, you don't really need the prefix. So we'll just call the second element, which will be the next hop, or I should say your neighbor, and then we'll just create that as a neighbor IP. And then I just had a print statement here just so we can see it, which is shown here. So actually, let's look at it again. So now those none values are eliminated. However, I did have an exception to being raised here, and I just threw it in there so that if something's none, it can't be stripped. And so you'll just see that come up, and maybe you can go back and look at your data and see what's going on. In any case, that's there. So now we've got this neat structured data, which is, the key here, ASN, the IP address, the group, the VLAN that we're going to use, which is in the data center fabric. So let's go look back here. Our connection from our router is just going into this switch, and this basically it's just one connection. This could be a pretty beefy connection, 10 gig or something, 100 gig, and then just gonna assign the VLAN, and then these are the big wolves in the internet. So let's take a look at the next part, which would be, now that we've got that data, we're just gonna write a template and the commands that we're going to send to our device, and that should be generated into the output folder here. So you can see that that's already happened because I just ran it. And then we're going to move on to the next part and actually deploy it. So one thing that I've been struggling with or fighting with in my own personal life is I run Linux as my main OS, and my work computer is a Windows machine, unfortunately. So little things like this are very important. There's a lot of ways that you can make sure that everything will work with in your Linux environment as well as in your Windows environment, such as paths is really one of the main issues that I always run into. So that's what this is. Basically, we're just going to open the file and just going to split the lines up and strip them and get rid of some stuff that we don't need in there. And then we're just going to send all those as a config set, or send as a config, which is the Nornir Pyxl plugin function. And so once that's done, then we're just going to go into that folder, use the shutail move utility, and just move these files into this other folder, output backups. And there's some stuff in here from before, but it just overwrites it if it's already in there. So just delete that just so you can see it happen, and just run it again. And once that's done, then we'll just get show router interface, which is the equivalent of a show IP interface brief or show IP or whatever in Cisco. And we'll just get that to the screen. And then once that's done, we should actually see our sessions come up, except for one minor thing that I need to do. I just rebooted it to lose the config. See that there's nothing here. No configuration at all. So let's just run it and see how we can take advantage of our new plugin, and by using structured data from Excel sheets. So I left that print statement in there just so we can see it again. And you can see that this folder got created. Now we've got, no, it's already done. So these new interfaces got created with the correct VLAN ID on the correct interface. Now let's take a look at our BGP neighbors. And you can see that they're already established 15 seconds ago. So that's basically it. I just thought it'd be a quick example of just kind of how I envision this being used, or simple simple ways to bring data in, and you can do some fun stuff with it. So thanks for watching.